So Rachel, thank you again for joining us today. We're very excited to hear what you have to say. What do you have for us today?
Well, thanks so much, Patty, and thank you to the Leadership Institute for having me. This is such an honor because I know you all put on great programs. Today I'm going to talk about networking, which is not a difficult concept, not rocket science. I'll start out with just dispelling some of the myths about networking. The first words that pop to a lot of people's mind are, a shark, somebody who works the room, is the life of the party, or an extreme extrovert that's just working the circuit. But you do not have to be any of those things to be a good networker. I think the key to success in life and to being an excellent networker is to just have a different frame of mind where you think that people are generally awesome. So, I think you'll do well in life in general with that mantra, but especially in networking. When I'm thinking about networking, the 5 W's that I want to answer are, who do I want to build in my network? Who are those people who you really want to get to know that can add value to your career, that can add value to the projects in your career, who broaden your worldview and add some interest into the things you're working on. Next is what. So what should you be talking about? How should you engage with these folks? And really it's just getting to know them better. You want to engage in a deep conversation that is meaningful, where you're really digging into their interests and adding value to them, as well as trying to kind of pull out of them their interests. And finally, I think it's important people think about when and where should I network? Is it just at cocktail parties or on the DC circuit? And I think you can really network anywhere. One time I was sitting on a plane coming home from CPAC, actually, back when I was in college, and my seatmate on my plane next to me offered me a job by the end of the trip, just because I was interested in him. He was a really cool guy, had neat career interests, and before you know it, we had just formed a long, meaningful relationship on that 2-hour plane ride. I've also formed relationships on Twitter, believe it or not. So in a Twitter conversation, I found key contacts who moved our policy reforms forward that we're working on. So really, you can network anywhere. You just got to be creative and look for opportunities. And the why of it all. So why, I think, building a strong network leads to overall happiness, right, and fulfillment in life, but also can add value to your organization that you're working for, can help you with career prospects down the road, can make other people's lives better too by building those strong, healthy relationships. So some practical tips if you're looking for what to do to get started. So let's say you just moved to DC or you're just starting a new career that requires you to build a robust network. Something that I find really practical is building a network map. So you start from square one, and like any good project, right, you start with the end in mind and think, who do I need to get into my network to either move a policy reform forward or help me find that job I've been looking for and further my career aspirations? And make a list of who are those 5 key people who are known as influencers, who are helpful in this arena. You can do that by, Google searching people in your field of interest or your policy area. You can do that looking at who are Twitter handles that are influential in this and opinion leaders in this area. Ask around your friends that you already have, and then chart a plan for how you're going to get to know them, how you're going to pour into them, and build something in the long term. And I keep saying long term because you're not looking for something one-off where you're just going to suck the life out of someone and just be in it for what you can get out of it. But think about how can you really contribute to this person as well, because any good networker knows that it's always a two-way street and two-way meaningful communication. So I'll talk a little bit about some pitfalls to avoid when you're networking.
Just to interrupt you before you get started with that. Now, I don't look at networking all the time as how can this person get me ahead in life. I like to look at it as how you say people are awesome, getting to know their stories. What are a couple examples, besides the one that you used about talking to the gentleman on the airplane, what are some examples from your colleagues or friends that they have seen where they started a conversation with someone just thinking, hey, this is a neat person to know, and then they ended up becoming successful because of that or to spite that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think a good example of that is recently at a conference, as part of, so my job at the State Policy Network is to build coalitions, so my job is networking. And we were at an energy and environment conference, and we're really looking to build a coalition of anywhere from industry people to agriculture and farm workers to policy experts in this area. So I was just talking to someone in the elevator at this conference, and she started telling her story, just digging in with, you start out with the typical questions of where are you from, why are you here, what are you interested in, and then you are an active listener kind of picking up little nuggets that tell what that person is most excited about in life. And then you build off of that, and just talking with her, she had an amazing background, amazing story of her family's farm in the Northeast, and then the amazing activist work that she was doing. So through that, starting to build a relationship where we can tie her into this broader coalition of people who are equally excited with her, and provides value to us because it moves our policy area forward, and it provides value to her, hopefully, because it ties her in with this nationwide network of people who are working on the same thing she is, and from a farming background as well.
Awesome. Now, you were starting to get into it, but what are some of the pitfalls that especially younger activists fall into when they start networking? Because a lot of people think Washington, D.C., oh, you're wheeling and dealing, and you have to kind of have a cutthroat personality in order to really make it in this town. And I think that it's the opposite, is that being nice to someone really gets you ahead. But what are some things that people do that they should not be doing while networking?
That's a really good point, because I think, like everyone, I've certainly made a lot of mistakes, and sometimes you just hit a desperation point, right, where you're thinking in short-term terms. But I think in any successful thing in life, you got to think long-term. And so most of the pitfalls in networking can all be under the umbrella of short-term thinking. So some of those destructive habits that come out of kind of short-term desperation or over-eagerness to get something done quickly, I think the biggest one could be termed a me monster. So this is that kind of characteristic, that personality trait where everything is back to you. Somebody says where they're from, oh, I'm from there, I visited there, then you go off on a tangent about you. And a lot of times that comes from, you're at a cocktail party, you're going in a circle, you only have 2 minutes with someone, you want to get everything possible about yourself out there and make a good impression. But it's kind of counterintuitive, because typically you make the best impression when you ask really insightful questions and are authentically interested in someone else because you think they're awesome. So the me monster is one. Another characteristic is being the know-it-all. So especially if you're talking to someone who has a little bit more career experience, and they're telling you about what they do and issues they're interested in, and if you don't have a curious disposition in life and you just kind of come at it as all the answers, or you're contradictory and like to argue with everything, nobody really likes a know-it-all especially at cocktail hour. Another characteristic is kind of what I'll term, this is a little harsh, but the desperate leech, where you're calling 5 times a day after you meet someone initially. It's never personal that somebody isn't emailing you back or not returning maybe a first call after you meet them. It's typically because that person is just really busy. And if you're kind of overeager and calling and emailing too often right in the beginning, then you'll probably turn that person off. 2 more. One is the meaningless DC lingo bingo. where you're just throwing out your acronyms and your DC terms to kind of sound important. But if you're not authentic, people are going to see right through that you are trying to just sound self-important. And finally, this might just be a personal pet peeve, but the room grazer in networking situations, where you meet someone and you're talking with them and the first thing they're doing is glazing the room instead of looking into your eyes when they're talking to you. I immediately don't trust that person, and it's unlikely I'm going to form a long-term relationship with them. So those are my don't do's.
It's really great advice. I always tell people, be sincere and don't be creepy. And creepy being a lot of those things, or not knowing when the conversation is supposed to end. Mm-hmm. Is that some people are overzealous or desperate. They're really excited, but it just does come across as being desperate. What is your advice to people to know when the conversation is actually over?
And I think when you hit big lulls, that's a good sign. I think if that person has been getting that good eye contact with you and then they start to graze around, that's a visual cue. When they start to kind of turn their body, that's a cue that it's time to maybe gracefully say, I'm going to go grab another drink, or, well, pardon me, I see someone I know. It was great to meet you. There's nothing wrong with saying, it was wonderful to meet you, grab a card, and go talk to someone else.
That's great. Now on the other side of things, say you are a seasoned professional and you do have a great network, but you want, it's always dig your well before you're thirsty. Harvey Mackay wrote a book called Dig Your Well Before You're Thirsty. It's a great book. If you haven't read it, read it. I'm sure you can get it on your Kindle or whatever tablet that you use to read books, which it's a novel thing, reading books. You guys should all try it. So he writes about learning to get to know people before you need something from them, or just how you say to get to know them because people are awesome. Now, if you already have a lot of connections, but you know that there's going to be someone who knows someone else down the road that you might be able to call on, so you invest your time in helping to get someone else get to know someone. It's being a connector rather than trying to be connected. Mm-hmm. What is your approach at trying to connect two different people together at a function that don't know each other yet, but you think that they would benefit from getting to know each other?
I think that's a great point, Patty. And one of my favorite books is Malcolm Gladwell's Tipping Point, because it talks about connectors. And I feel like a lot of people haven't done a lot of work into the role of connectors in society. And he says that a good connector is part of what makes social movements happen. So this is a really important role, as being this type of person. And when you're at a social gathering, like I said, a really good characteristic to develop is being an active listener. So as you're meeting people and learning about them, taking in kind of what their interests are, and I think the best way to connect someone is bringing them two together with a commonality. So when you go up and say, such and such, I heard that your son's playing in a basketball league. Well, such and such son is playing in a basketball league, and connect them that way. It can be something little like that. It doesn't have to be career related. Any commonality, I think, is a good bridge there. But in general, people appreciate being connected because it means they're being thought of. So even if you feel like it might be an awkward segue, more than likely people appreciate it.
One of the things that I'll do is when connecting to people, I try and get to know people, because you and I are very similar, is you try to get to know people as much as you can, because people are awesome. I always quote you whenever I give a talk like this. And it's remembering some nice facts that are thoughtful facts about someone, not just where they work or what you assume their salary might be. It's they make six figures and they work over at this organization. Instead, it's Rachel went to the University of Florida and she loves to fly fish, and her brother is this really great musician down in Nashville who I kind of am obsessed with his song now, the Albatross song. It's fantastic.
You all should download it on iTunes.
It's really good. And then you say, so-and-so over here, they're from Nashville, and I wonder if they know anybody down there that they could go and listen to catch one of his gigs sometime. And then it's one of those things that has absolutely nothing to do with work. It has everything to do with a personal connection. And I think that a lot of people are lacking that they're afraid that creating a personal connection will stop them from creating a professional connection. And in reality is that I believe that people would rather help out their friends than a name on a business card.
Yeah, that's a great point, Patty. I think, one of the most important attributes is, in thinking people are interesting and people are awesome and learning about them is the social lubricants are personal things. And typically the professional advancements come later. So finding out about, their interests in life and having that long-term bond, professional only goes so far. People change jobs here, every 2 to 3 years. So if you're not invested in someone's, personal interests and hobbies as well, then odds are your relationship isn't going to be long-term.
Speaking to that, and then we'll get into some questions from our viewers, becoming friends with someone to grow your personal network. What are your thoughts about being Facebook friends versus LinkedIn connections versus Twitter followers versus Instagram followers? Because these are all uses of social networking. Some are more professional than others, while others you truly get to know a person. What are your thoughts on the different social networks out there?
This is an important question because more and more people are building their connections based on their social networks and learning about people by what they see on Facebook and Twitter rather than in-person connections. So I would answer that question not by talking about the platform itself necessarily first, but more of you thinking about what is your personal brand? So how do you portray yourself in person? What are the things you want to be known for in your profession? And then how are you going to reflect that on your Facebook page, on your LinkedIn profile, on your Twitter and Instagram? You should think about all of these. If you want to protect very carefully a personal life and a work-life separation and you're two different people in those spheres, then you have to be very, very careful about your social networks that you're using for your personal life and make sure all your privacy settings are very strict. And even then, I'd be very careful about what you post on there. But my personal strategy in social networking is I like to keep all of my networks open to my professional life. And I don't have very much of a separation because, my job is to network. So I use my Facebook as a professional networking tool, and I connect with a lot of the people that I'm building relationships out in the States and around DC because like Patty mentioned before, when you know things about people's personal life, it makes working with them a lot more fun and a lot better working relationship. So, you're able to see where people go on vacation, what their kids are like, what their hobbies are based on what they're posting on Instagram and Facebook. So automatically you get to speed up relationships and get to know the people you're working with so much better. So for me personally, I like to build a good personal brand, what I'm putting out there. And I like to be friends on all of my networks with my professional contacts.
That's the same, and I think that is the difference between connectors and people who have yet to be a connector, because not everyone can be a connector. Mm-hmm. It's just not everyone has the personality to do so, and not everyone has the aspirations or job that wants to do that. But if you are going to be a connector of people, I think it's very important to be open about who you are, because when you're open and people can see and learn about you from your social media profiles, they're comfortable as soon as they see you. It's as if they've been in a conversation with you for years, mm-hmm. and you just pick up where you dropped off, even though you may have only met that person once or twice in real life, is just because, people will post things on Facebook, you comment, you like it, they post pictures of their families, you say, what a beautiful family, mm-hmm. and it's being sincere. There's nothing fake about what you're doing. Is when you're a connector of people, is that you definitely want to involve yourself in their lives that they're putting out there, and then allow people to involve themselves in your life that you're putting out there on social media. And you never know what can come of it. And when they see what you're doing when you're a connector, is that they can then say, oh, you know what, who I need to contact? I need to contact Rachel, or I need to contact Patty, because I bet they know someone who does this, or I wonder if they know someone who can help me get this done. And I get those requests a lot, and I'm sure you get those requests a lot, especially throughout the United States, which is your coalitions that you're building. So I just think it's very important that, again, your personal brand on your social networks is the one that you choose to put out there. Mm-hmm. And on the flip side of it, it's make sure that your picture is professional. Make sure that the photos and the statuses that you put out there, Facebook isn't your diary. Instagram isn't the place to post scandalous pictures of you. It's essentially, imagine what your grandparents who never had any of these things, if they had seen these things written in the newspaper or published in a newspaper, would they approve of what you were doing? And if the answer is no, there's a good chance that you probably shouldn't be doing that,
Right.
especially if your information is out there. All right, so I definitely want to get into some questions that we have.
Okay.
We have one. Where is it? Oh, here it is. We've gotten so many. Lauren, who is going to be a very recent graduate, or is a very recent graduate. 3 weeks from Friday. Congratulations, that's awesome. How do you approach someone who you admire and want to work with and ask them to give you a chance on a big job or project without being too pushy or seeming desperate?
That is a good question, and probably the $1 million question a lot of people have, especially right after graduation. I always think that the best approach, and this probably takes some more work and maybe isn't possible in all situations, but find your 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon or your 6 degrees of separation and find who your middleman is, somebody who can vouch for you and who can introduce you to that person. So think through, let's say you want to work at a big think tank here in DC. Think through who do I know that has connections to that think tank? Write them all down, think through it, look them up on LinkedIn and see if they have a connection to that person that you're trying to reach. And then ask that person who you already have a relationship with, hey, would you mind shooting an introductory note over to someone at XYZ organization or to that person if they know them? Would you be comfortable doing that for me? And just a nice introduction. It goes a lot further than cold calling someone.
That's awesome. Who should I meet with one-on-one, and who should you meet with at networking events?
I think it's all situational. I think it's good to establish a first contact at a networking event, so you get that first kind of touch point. Maybe you talk to them for a minute or two, and that kind of opens up the door, and you have more to talk about than when you meet with them one-on-one because you've established a couple of core things about them. But one-on-one, I think you should meet with those people. This should be a small group for you, the 5 or 6 people who you really want to emulate in your career or in your path, or that you think are just fascinating, amazing people who could broaden your worldview on things. Narrow that down to a small pool of people who are then maybe could connect you to others, or they themselves have a big network. But I think it's always good first to establish that first kind of touch point in a big group.
Yeah, and don't be afraid. It's people who are willing and ready to be mentors to younger people or to anyone. I mean, I'm always looking for mentors, and I am by no means starting out in the workforce. So people are looking to invest in young talent and help them along because, I know someone who has helped people along for years and years, and now those people that they 100% helped are now in key positions in organizations and throughout different departments in the government that they can now call in, and once again, it's the favors in Washington, but not so much dirty favors or anything like that. It's just they have connections within different organizations and different facets of the public policy process that they necessarily would not have had if they hadn't invested in younger people when they had the chance. So always be on the lookout for those types of people as well, is that they want to help you. And in turn, you're going to want to help them because you've developed a relationship.
Yeah, exactly.
What are some great resources that you can look to find really great networking events?
Oh yeah, well, there are a lot of good places out there. LI is one. Patty is the guru of lots of events. So
Stop it.
this gal. So that's a great resource. The Heritage Job Bank, Sean Kibbe from Heritage sends out a great list of events. If you're not on that, definitely get there. There's a couple of, I actually find a lot through Twitter, following different think tanks and organizations. There is an email, I don't know if it's still going out, that was called Link Tank that sent out broader DC events, not just the conservative movement. DC Fishbowl, I think it is, and a lot of the different publications. So, Washington Post lists a lot of them out.
And then outside of that is if you don't live in Washington, D.C., there's the State Policy Network. If you go to their website, which is
spn.org.
very difficult, spn.org, where you can find all of the conservative, the right-of-center think tanks throughout the United States and all of their affiliates. And you can call them and say, hey, are there any great events happening? Are there any places where I can come and mingle with the leaders, the thought leaders in our state, and people who are the activists within our state? Americans for Prosperity has a great national network. FreedomWorks has a great national network. Look at organizations like that, because you don't necessarily have to be in Washington, D.C. to affect changes in public policy and to grow your network. Another thing that Rachel and I did was we wanted to start our own just networking organization in Arlington County, which is where we are right now, across the river in D.C., and it's for anyone who lives or works in Arlington and our friends. And it's basically not just our personal friends, but friends of those who fit that mold. And there's nothing formal about it. It's come and network, and we call it Arlington Allies, and we average 100 people per happy hour. There's no money involved. You don't have to sign anything, and it's just a great way to get to know a lot more people and to provide something, because that's, as connectors, is we want to provide an event that allows others to connect. And you and I both introduced a bunch of people to each other and connected them at these happy hours that we put on. So you don't necessarily, if you don't have it, then create it, and don't be afraid to.
And another great resource that we didn't mention yet is America's Future Foundation. It's a great young professionals organization. They have a huge chapter here in DC, but they also have chapters all over the country. And if you don't have one in your city, then they are always looking to help other young professionals start up their own chapters. Is it americasfuture.org? One of those.
I think so, yeah.
Google America's Future Foundation.
Yes, it's awesome. Are there any key phrases to use when networking? And on the flip side, are there any phrases you don't want to use?
It's a tough question, because I think the number one rule, as Patty said, is to be sincere and authentic. So I kind of shy away from those key phrases or those $10 words that are magic words, because really you just want to be sincere. I would say having really good listening skills is better than saying all the right things, because 9 times out of 10 people want to be with someone authentic and sincere, not someone who's dropping $10 words and whatnot.
Like synergy.
Yeah, that's the lingo bingo.
If you do this while you're talking, people are going to know you're fake.
Yeah, flicking your hair back.
Right. I'm looking around the room. Yeah, so just be yourself.
Yeah.
That's we're not going to ask that question. This is a joke question from a colleague. Actually, what do you do if someone just doesn't come across as a very nice person when you're talking to them?
I like to give people the benefit of the doubt that maybe they're having a bad day, and not think, people have bad intentions all the time. But I think you do have to be careful and to guard yourself, because, I do think most people have good intentions, and maybe they're just having an off day, but you will encounter some of those people, right, that will misconstrue your words or have ill intention. So I think you just have to be cordial and nice, and put a nice smile on, guard what you give away, and be careful of what you're talking about, and then move on to the next person, because life's too short.
That's true. This is a great question. This is from Brian, who will be moving to the West Coast in the next few months. I assume this is a good thing, Brian. He wants to know, do you have any good advice for starting anew in a city? And he's a bit of an introvert, And how does an introvert work a room when it doesn't come as naturally to them?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I remember when I first moved to DC, I didn't know a whole lot of people. And while I am an extrovert, I'm not an extreme extrovert. And I think that it's a misconception that introverts don't have good people skills. Introverts are often the best at building really good relationships. So I think that the best advice, it's so much easier to go into a new situation with at least one person you know, even if you only kind of know them, than to walk in a room by yourself, because even the biggest extrovert is intimidated by that situation. So if you're moving to a new city, if you absolutely know no one there, I would again go back to the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon and think who in your network might know someone there. Look at your Facebook friends and see who has a connection in the city you're going to, or your LinkedIn profile, and ask them to introduce you to someone there, and find that kind of mutual link there to someone you knew back home. And then ask that person, hey, could we grab a drink or grab coffee sometime? Connect with that person and say, hey, would you mind if I came along with you to such and such event, or find out what their hobbies are and tag along a little bit at first. And then through that, maybe you meet one person there and say, hey, could I tag along with you to another event? And I think everybody's been the new person at some point. So again, assuming people want to help people because they've been in those situations too. So I think, it's that finding that one person who happens to be a connector, and kind of keep your eyes open for the person who seems to have a lot of other connections, because they tend to be the door openers, and will help you kind of broaden your people scope in that city.
And I mean, Brian, we are a resource too. You can ask us if we know anybody who's out where you're moving to. As we are connectors of people, it's 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, 6 degrees of Rachel Kopek. So don't be afraid to ask us for help as well, is that's what we do for a living. Is we want to make sure that people, especially good conservatives and liberty-minded folks, are connected. So because a networked activist is a more effective activist, and that's really what our ultimate goal is, especially for the movement.
Yeah.
I have a great question, and this is about LinkedIn. And I don't really use LinkedIn that much. I am much more of a personal connection person. It's not a look on LinkedIn, but I do know that a lot of the corporate world uses LinkedIn a lot. I have friends that have been approached via LinkedIn and poached via LinkedIn because of some of the things they have on there. This person wants to know if how valuable do you think LinkedIn is?
I think it's important to have a really good LinkedIn face, because increasingly recruiters are going there. You better bet every employer is going to look at your LinkedIn first thing. So putting a good first foot forward is very important, and having a good up-to-date profile. As far as pouring into, building up your connections there, I think it's good for right after you meet with someone new, connect with them on LinkedIn, so then they'll have that facial recognition. They're like, oh yeah, I did meet that person, and they'll connect the face to the name. So I think it's good for follow-up and kind of keeping a Rolodex, if you will. And they say, as far as social networks go, they being social media gurus, that LinkedIn is being used more and more. So maybe 3 years ago it wasn't that important, but now, recruiters are on it constantly. People are using it increasingly to, start conversations. I've contracted with vendors through LinkedIn. I actually think it's growing in importance every month we go here.
What I would also say is follow Wired and Gizmodo and Lifehacker and Mashable and all of those resources online to see what the next big social network is. It doesn't even have to be a big social network. The reason why you want to follow that is because you want to get your username immediately. I was too young to purchase my name as a domain name, Patricia Simpson, but I have Patricia Simpson for Gmail and Twitter and a lot of other social media accounts that no one else was able to get, because I would follow the latest social media trends and immediately snatch up my username so no one else could ruin my reputation online. Luckily, the famous Patricia Simpson of patriciasimpson.com is an author of paranormal love stories, so I don't think that she really has a way to ruin my reputation other than people thinking I'm a millionaire author. One final question before we wrap up, and this is talking about following up with people after you meet them via LinkedIn. It's really, how quickly after you meet someone do you follow up with them, and how do you keep track of who you've met and when you've talked to them so you don't become that pushy person or you don't become that person that they forget about?
It's a good question because life is busy and it's hard to do this. I would recommend the day after you meet someone sending if it's a quick meeting, send them a nice email. Hey, it was great to meet you, something memorable about the conversation, or even if you talked about something funny, it's good to add that personal flair. And if you met with them one-on-one with a coffee meeting or a lunch meeting, it's nice to write a handwritten note. And as far as kind of keeping tabs on when you did this, if you're thinking, when was the last time I met with someone? I mean, make sure you double check when you sent that email. If it was, 2 days ago, it's probably too soon. You should probably, and you haven't heard back from that initial email you sent, I would wait at least a week before sending the follow-up email. Give that person time to respond because you don't know how busy they are, whether they're out of town or something. Some people, if you're kind of like Patty and I, and you're interested in becoming a connector in your career, and that's what you want to be known as, there are ways to kind of track your network and build out what pots of people your connections are in and keep better tabs on, have I talked to this person yet? Or I need to really foster and build this relationship. A lot of people, I personally have started using Salesforce, which is a database, which your organization should have some sort of contact management database that you might be able to utilize. Some people use Excel sheets, I know, and kind of track, when was the last time I talked to them and when's the next time I want to talk to them if you want to be really regimented about it and this is a part of your career.
Definitely when I first moved to DC is that I had an Excel spreadsheet that, I guess thinking back, it kind of looks like I was creating a database about people with really creepy details, such as where I met them, when their birthday is, what are their favorite sports teams, what are some interesting facts about them. But it was just so I could remember things about them. So when I did meet them or see them again and introduce them to someone else, because they always have people, and I'm sure you do too, hey, do you know so-and-so? Can you give me an introduction? Or do you know someone at this organization? Or do you know someone here? Is that then you would go and look. Luckily, I have, Facebook has kind of replaced that for me. Is I can keep up with a lot more people on Facebook. My friends from home always ask me, what is it that you do? And I said, well, I do this and that. They go, but it seems like you're always on Facebook. I said, but I'm not really always on Facebook. I'll take a little bit of time out of each day and just kind of catch up with everyone. And it seems so superficial because you only put the life that you want people to think you have on Facebook. If that's the case, fine. I'm interacting with the life that you're putting out there. But aside from that is that when I see you in person, I want to get to know you a little bit better than just that superficial what's on the surface. I like to remember little stories about their families that they told me or a joke that they told me. If you know someone's parents' names or their spouse's names or their siblings' names or their kids' names, those are good details to remember. But they're only details that you remember if that person has told you those details. It's never, oh yeah, so I was seeing that your kids, Billy and Sally, and the person goes, I've never met you before. That's the creepy version. So I would definitely, listen to what Rachel had to say, and this was recorded, and you can revisit this webinar again. It'll be on our archives at www.leadershipinstitute.org/activism-on-demand. I like to do this. It's right there on your screen. That's called the magic of television, guys. So anyways, Rachel, what are some closing words you have for our soon-to-be expert networkers?
I'd boil it down to a real quick phrase of, in life in general, and especially networking, be interesting and be interested. Most important, be interested and ask lots of questions and be interested in their life. And then you yourself, you're going to be a better networker if you're lead an interesting life. So you're able to connect with people. You say, oh, I've been to that city too, or I've, tried this hobby as well, and I know such and such, and I've been there before. So lead an interesting life and be intently interested in the people around you, because especially in this activism political world, we meet amazing people who are doing amazing things on a day-to-day basis, and it only takes 2 or 3 questions to get in there and find these things out. So get out there, be networked.
Yes, and even though you haven't met us in person, you can connect with us via Twitter or email. I want to say thank you to everyone who tuned in today. I know we had a very large viewing audience, and again, thank you, and thank you to everyone who worked on this webinar today. Thank you to Rachel. She has become a dear friend over the past couple of years that we've gotten to know each other. And I want to invite you to check out our archives, www.leadershipinstitute.com/activism on demand. It's a mouthful. And to tune into our next webinar when we have one in a couple weeks. Thanks again and have a great afternoon.